Something has changed. Something serious. And fans of Little People, Big World are starting to ask questions no one expected. Because recently, quiet rumors began spreading. Rumors suggesting that Chris Marek may have uncovered something that could change everything. Something connected to the farm. Something connected to decisions made behind closed doors. And most shocking of all, something that could potentially place Matt Roloff and Caryn Chandler under serious scrutiny. Now, to be absolutely clear, nothing has been officially confirmed. No formal charges have been announced. No legal action has been verified. But the questions alone have been enough to shake the fan community. Because when trust, property, legacy, and family are involved, even the possibility of hidden truths can change everything. And when that legacy includes Roloff Farms, a property that has become almost as iconic as the show itself, the stakes feel even higher. For years, viewers have watched this family navigate change, marriages, divorces, disagreements over the farm's future, and emotional conversations about inheritance and ownership. They've seen shifting alliances. They've seen fractured communication. They've seen plans fall apart. But this feels different. Because this time, the rumors aren't just about family tension. They're about potential consequences. They're about decisions that may have long-term implications. And they center around one very unexpected figure, Chris. Why him? Why now? What exactly did he allegedly find? Was it paperwork? A financial detail? A disagreement over ownership terms? Or simply information that raised more questions than answers? At this point, we have to emphasize, speculation does not equal fact. But speculation spreads for a reason. Fans began noticing subtle shifts, changes in tone during public appearances, different body language during recent interviews, and an unusual silence around certain topics involving the farm's future. Observant viewers know when something feels off. And lately, many have said the same thing. There's more going on than we're being told. The farm has always represented stability, legacy, continuity. But ever since discussions about selling portions of the property became public, emotions have been running high, not just within the family, but among loyal viewers who feel deeply connected to what the farm represents. So when whispers began suggesting that Chris may have uncovered information tied to internal decisions, it didn't take long for the fan community to react. Some believe it could be a misunderstanding, something minor blown out of proportion. Others believe it could be tied to past negotiations over ownership. And a few are asking the most dramatic question of all. Could this lead to serious legal scrutiny? Again, there is no verified evidence of wrongdoing. But perception can be powerful. And in the world of reality television, perception often drives the narrative long before facts catch up. The bigger issue may not be whether a crime occurred. It may be about trust, about transparency, about who knew what and when. Because if Chris did uncover something significant, the real impact might not be legal at all. It could be relational. It could reshape alliances. It could redefine how future decisions are made. And it could permanently alter the emotional dynamic surrounding the farm. For years, fans have debated who should ultimately guide the future of Roloff Farms. They've analyzed every interview, every social media caption, every subtle comment. Now, those same fans are watching even more closely. Waiting. Listening. Trying to understand whether this is just another rumor or the beginning of a much larger story. What exactly did Chris discover? Why does it matter now? And could this situation have real consequences for the future of the Roloff legacy? Because when family, business, and public attention collide, even a single discovery can change everything. For years, Roloff Farms represented stability. It represented family history. It represented decades of memories built carefully over time in front of millions of viewers who followed the journey on Little People, Big World. Matt Roloff had always been at the center of that story. He was the builder, the planner, the visionary who transformed a modest property into a nationally recognized destination. Every pumpkin season, every renovation, every ambitious project carried his signature drive. For years, fans believed that as long as Matt was steering the ship, the farm's direction was clear. Caryn Chandler, over time, became part of that world too. She wasn't just present in the background. She became involved in daily life, long-term conversations, and the emotional structure surrounding the farm. Viewers watched her transition from employee to partner, from supportive presence to someone who appeared deeply woven into future planning. Whether discussing property decisions or public appearances, her influence seemed to grow steadily. And then there is Chris Marek. After marrying Amy Roloff, he stepped into a complex family dynamic that had already lived through decades of change. Chris often appeared calm, steady, and careful with his words. He rarely inserted himself into conflict. Instead, he seemed to observe, to listen, to support Amy quietly. At first, everything appeared peaceful. Publicly, the family maintained a sense of unity. Social media posts were cordial. Appearances were measured. There were no dramatic announcements, no explosive confrontations, just the steady rhythm of life continuing. But over time, subtle tension began to surface. Not loud, not obvious, but noticeable. Fans began pointing out small shifts, fewer shared appearances, carefully worded comments, moments of visible discomfort during discussions about the property. None of it confirmed anything, yet taken together, it created an atmosphere of uncertainty. And recently, speculation intensified. Some viewers believe Chris may have become aware of information that raised unexpected questions. Questions not only about the farm's future, but about decisions made years ago during ownership transitions. Decisions involving buyouts, property valuations, long-term agreements. Again, there has been no official confirmation of wrongdoing, conflict, or legal trouble. But when conversations around legacy, control, and financial stakes grow quieter instead of clearer, curiosity naturally follows. What changed? Why does the dynamic feel different? Because when people start acting differently, when communication becomes limited, when public warmth feels more restrained, there's usually a reason. It doesn't always mean scandal. It doesn't always mean betrayal. Sometimes it simply means new information has surfaced and people are processing it privately. Still, for a family whose lives unfolded so publicly for years, silence can speak just as loudly as words. The farm is more than land. It carries emotional history. It represents identity. And any shift in who influences its direction will inevitably affect relationships around it. Right now, no one has made direct accusations. No official statements suggest conflict. But the timing, the quiet distance, and the subtle change in tone between certain family members have left fans watching closely. Because when stability begins to feel uncertain, people want answers. And until those answers come, the questions will only grow louder. When Chris Marek first became part of the Roloff family, his connection came through love, not through business, not through ownership, and not through the long and complicated history tied to Roloff Farms. His relationship with Amy Roloff introduced him into a world that had already been shaped by decades of emotional investment, difficult decisions, and deeply personal experience. He wasn't there during the earliest years when the farm was being built from the ground up. He wasn't present during the period when Matt Roloff and Amy worked side by side to transform raw land into something meaningful, something that would later become known around the world through Little People, Big World. He didn't experience the family's earlier struggles firsthand. He didn't live through the emotional turning points that longtime viewers remember so clearly. And because of that, Chris entered the family with something rare. Distance. Not emotional distance from Amy, but historical distance from the conflicts that had shaped the family long before he arrived. This distance gave him a perspective unlike anyone else. He wasn't carrying emotional scars from past disagreements. He wasn't influenced by years of tension, misunderstandings, or unresolved feelings. He didn't have personal attachments to earlier business decisions or disputes. Instead, he saw things as they were in the present moment, without the weight of the past clouding his judgment. And sometimes, that kind of clarity can be powerful. Because when someone steps into an established family system from the outside, they often notice things that others have become accustomed to. Patterns that seem normal to insiders can appear unusual to someone new. Changes that feel gradual to family members can appear sudden and significant to someone observing with fresh eyes. Chris wasn't looking for problems. He wasn't trying to challenge anyone. He wasn't attempting to insert himself into matters that didn't involve him. But simply by being present, simply by observing, he gained an understanding of how things functioned, how decisions were made, how communication flowed, and how influence moved behind the scenes. And fans began to notice that presence. They noticed how Chris listened more than he spoke. They noticed how he remained calm during moments that carried emotional weight. They noticed how he seemed thoughtful, careful, and measured in his reactions. Unlike those who had spent years navigating the emotional complexity of Roloff Farms, Chris approached situations with patience. He wasn't reacting based on old wounds. He was responding based on what he saw directly in front of him. That difference mattered. Because sometimes, emotional history can shape perception. But Chris's perception was shaped by observation. Not assumption. Not memory. But experience in real time. Over time, his role in the family naturally evolved. He wasn't just Amy's partner anymore. He became part of family gatherings. He became present during important conversations. He became someone who witnessed interactions others never saw. Not as an insider to the business, but as a witness to the dynamics. And that subtle distinction gave him a unique position. He wasn't responsible for decisions. He wasn't accountable for past actions. But he was present. He was aware. He was watching. Not with suspicion, but with awareness. Fans began wondering whether that awareness gave Chris insight others didn't have. Whether his neutral position allowed him to recognize shifts in behavior, tone, or influence that might not have been obvious to those deeply embedded in the family's history. Not because he was searching for answers, but because sometimes answers reveal themselves naturally over time. Through small moments, through quiet observations, through subtle changes that only become clear in hindsight. Chris never presented himself as someone seeking control. He never positioned himself as someone trying to influence the farm's direction. His role was different. His role was supportive. Supportive of Amy. Supportive of stability. Supportive of peace. And yet, his presence alone introduced a new variable into the family dynamic. A calm observer. A steady presence. Someone who stood close enough to see clearly, but distant enough to remain objective. And in situations where emotions run deep, objectivity can quietly become one of the most powerful positions of all. Because while others may react emotionally, an observer simply sees. For decades, Roloff Farms stood as the heart of the family's identity. Viewers of Little People, Big World watched it grow from a simple property into something far more meaningful. It wasn't just a filming location. It was where memories were made, where children were raised, where traditions were built year after year. And because of that, any decision involving the farm was never going to be simple. When Matt Roloff began discussing the possibility of selling part of the property, it immediately created emotional ripples. From a practical standpoint, it may have seemed like a business decision. Land has value. Maintenance requires effort. And as time passes, priorities naturally evolve. But emotionally, it was different. Because for many, the farm represented continuity. It represented stability. And most importantly, it represented family unity. Fans began paying closer attention to the conversations happening both on and off camera. They noticed moments of hesitation, moments of disappointment, and moments where expectations between family members didn't seem fully aligned. In particular, many viewers had long assumed that one of Matt's sons, either Zach Roloff or Jeremy Roloff, might eventually take over the property. That assumption wasn't officially guaranteed, but it existed in the minds of fans who had watched the family grow for years. So when those expectations didn't materialize in the way people imagined, questions naturally followed. Questions about timing, questions about communication, and questions about whether everyone involved truly felt heard during those critical decisions. At the same time, Matt wasn't making those decisions alone. His partner, Caryn Chandler, had become an important part of his life. She had been present through many of the farm's more recent transitions. She had supported Matt through challenges, and she had stood beside him as the future of the property came into focus. That presence didn't go unnoticed. Some fans viewed Caryn as a supportive partner who helped Matt navigate difficult choices. Others wondered how much influence she may have had behind the scenes. It's important to emphasize again that influence doesn't automatically imply wrongdoing. In any close partnership, people naturally share thoughts, perspectives, and advice. That's part of being in a committed relationship. But when emotions are involved, and when something as meaningful as the farm is at stake, even normal influence can become a source of public speculation. Meanwhile, Amy Roloff, who had once shared ownership of the farm, had already gone through her own emotional process of letting go. Her decision to sell her portion of the property marked the end of one chapter and the beginning of another. For Amy, the farm had represented decades of her life. Her memories, her sacrifices, her role as a mother, raising 4 children on that land. Letting go of that connection couldn't have been easy, and fans who had followed her journey understood the emotional weight behind that transition. Then there's Chris Marek, who entered the family later but became part of its evolving story. As Amy's husband, his connection to the farm came through her experiences, through her memories, through her emotional attachment to what the farm had represented. And as the farm's future became uncertain, everyone connected to it, directly or indirectly, felt the impact. What made the situation even more complex was the public nature of it all. Because unlike most families facing private decisions about property, this family's journey unfolded in front of millions. Every conversation, every reaction, every visible moment of tension. Fans watched closely. They analyzed expressions. They interpreted words. They tried to understand what might be happening beneath the surface. And when answers weren't immediately clear, uncertainty filled the gaps. Uncertainty doesn't mean something improper happened. But uncertainty has a way of keeping questions alive. Questions about whether the emotional consequences of those decisions have fully settled. Questions about whether everyone has truly found peace with the outcome. And questions about whether the farm's story is truly finished, or whether its future still holds unexpected developments. Because when something represents more than land, when it represents identity, when it represents legacy, its story rarely ends quietly. Recently, fans noticed subtle changes. Chris appeared quieter in certain public appearances. Interactions seemed more careful, more measured. And when people begin behaving differently, it naturally leads others to wonder why. It doesn't mean something dramatic happened, but it can suggest awareness. Awareness of tension, awareness of information, or awareness of something unresolved. Fans began speculating whether Chris Marek had learned something that changed his understanding of past events. Not necessarily illegal, not necessarily confirmed, but enough to create emotional distance. Because Chris has always been seen as calm, balanced, careful in his words. He isn't someone known for dramatic reactions. He isn't someone who seeks conflict, which makes even subtle changes feel more noticeable to those paying attention. Viewers who have followed Little People, Big World for years understand how observant Chris can be. He listens more than he speaks. He observes more than he reacts. And people like that often notice things others miss. Some fans began revisiting past moments. Conversations. Decisions involving Matt Roloff. Discussions connected to the future of Roloff Farms. And the growing presence of Caryn Chandler in those decisions. Not because anything has been officially confirmed, but because perspective changes over time. Sometimes, information that once seemed small begins to feel more significant later. Sometimes, patterns only become clear in hindsight. Fans noticed that Chris appeared more thoughtful when the subject of the farm came up. More reserved. Not confrontational. Not emotional in obvious ways. But reflective. And reflection often comes from understanding. It's important to emphasize that none of this confirms any wrongdoing. None of this proves that Chris discovered something specific or alarming. But perception matters. And when someone who has always appeared relaxed begins to show subtle caution, people notice. They wonder what he knows. They wonder what he's thinking. They wonder whether his view of the situation has changed. Because relationships are built on trust, on clarity, on shared understanding. And when that understanding shifts, even slightly, it can change everything about how someone sees the people around them. For Chris, his connection to the family is deeply personal. He isn't just an observer. He's part of the family's present, part of its future, which means anything affecting the farm, anything affecting its leadership, anything affecting its legacy, would naturally affect him too. Fans aren't claiming certainty. They aren't claiming proof. But they are noticing something. A shift in energy. A shift in tone. A shift that suggests Chris may be seeing the situation differently than before. And sometimes, the quietest changes are the ones that mean the most. Matt and Caryn have continued focusing on their life and future plans. For years, viewers of Little People, Big World have watched Matt Roloff navigate both personal and business decisions with determination. He has always been someone who prefers action over explanation. Someone who moves forward, even when questions remain behind him. And beside him, throughout many of those recent years, has been Caryn Chandler. Their relationship has evolved in front of millions of viewers. From friendship to partnership to building a shared future together. They have spoken openly in the past about their plans, their hopes, and their commitment to creating stability, especially as they look toward retirement, personal peace, and long-term security. But now, in the face of growing online discussions and fan speculation, something noticeable has emerged. They have remained quiet. Publicly, they have not addressed any claims or rumors suggesting legal trouble. There have been no statements, no clarifications, no direct responses. And that silence, while not unusual for public figures protecting their privacy, has still captured attention. Because silence can mean many things. Sometimes, silence simply reflects a desire to avoid fueling rumors. Sometimes, it reflects emotional exhaustion from years of public scrutiny. Sometimes, it reflects a personal decision to keep certain matters private. And sometimes, silence exists because there is nothing to respond to at all. But for fans, silence often leaves space for interpretation. Some viewers believe Matt and Caryn are simply continuing their lives without feeling the need to respond to speculation that may not be grounded in verified facts. Others wonder if their silence reflects caution. Not fear, not confirmation, but caution. A careful choice to avoid escalating conversations that may already feel emotionally charged. This difference in interpretation has created a divide among fans. Some continue expressing full support. They see Matt as someone who built something meaningful from the ground up. Someone who spent decades shaping Roloff Farms into a place filled with memories, opportunity, and legacy. To those supporters, Matt's silence is simply strength. A sign that he refuses to let outside noise disrupt his focus. Others, however, feel uncertainty, not because of anything confirmed, but because uncertainty itself creates emotional tension. Fans form deep emotional connections to long-running reality shows. They don't just watch events unfold. They invest in the people. They invest in their happiness, their struggles, their futures. And when something feels unclear, that emotional investment turns into concern. It's important to remember that public figures like Matt and Caryn live in a space where privacy and visibility constantly collide. Every decision they make, every appearance, every absence, becomes part of a larger narrative shaped not only by reality, but by perception. And perception can be powerful. Meanwhile, others connected to the family have also maintained their own quiet distance from speculation. Amy Roloff and Chris Marek have continued focusing on their own lives, their own routines, and their own future together. They have shared moments of normalcy, moments of calm, moments that suggest stability, even while questions continue circulating elsewhere. And that contrast has only deepened the sense that something emotional, not necessarily legal, but emotional, may be shifting behind the scenes. Because sometimes, silence isn't about hiding facts. Sometimes, it's about protecting peace, protecting emotional stability, protecting relationships, protecting the future. Matt and Caryn have spent years building their life together. They have faced public criticism before. They have faced change. They have faced transition. And each time, they have continued forward. Together. Without confirmation of any legal issues, there is no factual basis to conclude wrongdoing. But that hasn't stopped the emotional impact of uncertainty. Because uncertainty creates questions. Questions create discussion. And discussion creates narratives that take on lives of their own. Right now, Matt and Caryn's silence remains just that. Silence. Not confirmation, not denial. Just silence. And until something official is said, if anything is ever said, fans are left watching closely, listening carefully, and wondering what the future holds. Regardless of what is true or not, situations like this can leave a lasting emotional impact, especially on people whose lives have been so deeply connected for decades. Because this isn't just about business. It isn't just about property. It isn't just about decisions made quietly behind closed doors. It's about people. It's about relationships that were built over years of shared experiences, shared struggles, and shared memories. For Amy Roloff, the farm has always represented something deeply personal. It wasn't simply a place to live. It was where her children grew up. It was where family traditions were created. It was where milestones were celebrated. And even after her separation from Matt Roloff, the emotional connection to that land never truly disappeared. Because places like that don't lose their meaning overnight. And for Chris Marek, stepping into this world meant becoming part of something that already had a long and complicated history. He wasn't there in the early years. He didn't witness the original struggles, but he became part of the present. He became part of Amy's future. And naturally, anything that affects her emotional well-being affects him as well. Because when you care about someone, their past becomes connected to your present. At the same time, Caryn Chandler has built her own place within this evolving dynamic. Her presence in Matt's life brought new stability for him, especially during periods of major personal transition. She has been seen supporting him, standing beside him, and sharing in the responsibilities and realities that come with maintaining something as large and meaningful as Roloff Farms. But with that presence also comes attention. And with attention comes questions. Not necessarily accusations, not necessarily conclusions, but questions. Because families, especially families that have experienced public change, often carry emotional layers that outsiders never fully see. There are conversations that happen privately, feelings that remain unspoken, concerns that are never fully expressed in public, and sometimes even the smallest shift in tone or behavior can create a ripple effect that touches everyone involved. For Matt, the farm has always represented more than land. It has represented independence. It has represented achievement. It has represented his ability to build something lasting, something meaningful, something that would outlive the moment. And decisions involving something that important are rarely simple. They carry weight. They carry consequences. They carry emotional complexity. And when multiple people share emotional ties to the same place, those decisions can affect more than just the person making them. They can affect trust. They can affect communication. They can affect the comfort people feel around each other, even when nothing is openly wrong, even when everything appears calm on the surface. Because emotional distance doesn't always arrive dramatically. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through pauses in conversation, through moments of hesitation, through subtle changes in how people interact. Fans of Little People, Big World have followed this family for years. They've watched relationships form. They've watched relationships change. They've watched difficult conversations unfold. And they've also watched moments of healing, moments of understanding, moments where people chose peace, even when peace wasn't easy. That history makes the present moment feel especially significant. Because the future of this family isn't just about what happens legally or financially. It's about what happens emotionally. Will conversations bring clarity? Will misunderstandings be resolved? Will relationships grow stronger through honesty and communication? Or will emotional distance continue to grow quietly over time? The answer isn't something viewers can see yet. And perhaps it isn't something even the family themselves fully knows. Because the future isn't decided in a single moment, it's shaped slowly, through choices, through conversations, through understanding or the absence of it. What remains undeniable is that this family shares something permanent, a shared past. No matter how much life changes, no matter where each person goes, that shared history will always exist. It connects them. It defines part of their story. And it ensures that what happens next will matter, not just for practical reasons, but for deeply human ones. And for fans who have followed their journey through every season, every challenge, and every emotional turning point, the hope remains the same. That whatever happens next, it leads to clarity. It leads to understanding. And most importantly, it leads to peace. Right now, there are still more questions than answers surrounding Little People, Big World, and everything unfolding around Roloff Farms. No official confirmations. No verified legal outcomes. No public statements detailing any dramatic consequences. Only speculation. Only observations. Only growing curiosity from fans who have followed this family's journey for years. What Chris Marek may or may not have discovered remains unclear. What Matt Roloff and Caryn Chandler may or may not face in the future remains unknown. And that's important to remember. In the world of reality television, emotions run high. Rumors spread quickly. Assumptions can take on a life of their own. But until something is officially confirmed, everything remains part of an ongoing conversation, not a conclusion. What is certain, however, is that the story of Roloff Farms continues to evolve. This farm has never been just a property. It represents years of hard work, family history, dreams, disagreements, transitions. It has been at the center of love stories, family tension, generational change, and deeply personal decisions. And because viewers have watched those moments unfold over time, they feel connected, invested, protective. When legacy, family, and trust are intertwined, every shift feels significant. Fans will continue watching closely, waiting for clarity, waiting for truth, waiting to see how relationships develop, waiting to understand what the future truly holds for everyone involved. Whether this turns out to be a misunderstanding, a turning point, or simply another chapter in a long and complicated story, one thing remains true: the journey isn't over. And as always, we'll be here to follow every development responsibly and thoughtfully as it unfolds. With that said, Thanks for watching, and until next time.